Hello, and welcome to AP Table Talk, a podcast where we explore board games and what makes them interesting to us. I'm your host, Brian. Joining me, as always, my co-host, my cousin, the real-life Mario of education, Dr. Dave Ing.
Hey,
Dave, how's it going?
it's me, Dave. Oh, we're back, Bri. We're talking about more board game mechanics.
That's right.
Mhm.
Well, talking about not that we talk about video games too much. I just started my kids back onto some video games. They're not great at it because they haven't played a lot, so it's painful to watch. They were playing some Mario, and I've never seen kids die so many times to that first Goomba.
Yeah, you know what? I think that like learning how to play a platformer was like a rite of passage for us,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
level 1-1, world 1-1.
Yep. They were having fun, so I think that didn't encourage them to try harder. But so I just had to leave the room. I couldn't watch them die to that Goomba over and over
I can't watch you fail so many times.
Yeah. All right. So today's episode, we are talking about the follow mechanic,
Mhm.
right? Okay. So we'll start off with our kind of defining that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So normally, Bri, you go first. You provide your personal definition, and I'll
Right.
jump in and provide the one-off BGG.
Okay. So what do we mean by the follow mechanic in terms of board games? Well, when I think of the follow mechanic, I think of games where there is some type of action selection
Mhm.
mechanic, and once the current player determines that action, the other players have the opportunity to follow, quote unquote, the action, and by that I mean uh, get a chance to perform the same action, or sometimes a variant of that action. I think the most common thing is that the current player gets a more powerful version of the action, whereas everyone following gets a lesser powerful version of that action.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about that later because I
Okay.
felt like that was like a critical aspect of me trying to define what this mechanic is.
Mhm.
But if we were going off the description from Board Game Geek, it says, quote, for the follow mechanic, one player selects an action.
Mhm.
Other players may perform that action or a modified version of it. So to your
Right.
point, Brian, this is closely related to the mechanics action drafting and role selection and is often implemented alongside those systems. So I think that we will see some examples of that in this episode.
Okay, definitely. I mean, I can definitely think of action drafting. I'm
Mhm.
trying to think of role selection, but I guess when we get there, we can discuss it some more.
Mhm, mhm,
All right, so we will move on to our examples.
mhm.
And you want to explain our role for initiative?
Yeah. So if you are listening to AP Table Talk for the very first time, what Brian and I like to do is we both have D20s right now, and we're both going to roll them simultaneously. Whoever rolls the highest is going to take initiative and lead this part of the discussion. So, Brian, ready to roll when you are.
Okay, I'm
3, 2, 1, roll.
Got a 5.
I had a 2.
Okay.
So you
Okay,
lead, Brian.
so and we're gonna start off with the biggest or quote unquote most noteworthy
Yep. Yep.
germ. Okay.
Mhm.
So I did something a little different in this one because I'm suspecting, similar to previous episodes, that we may have a game that is very obvious for both of us in some categories. So I do have kind of a honorable mentions in my categories. So I would say to me the most noteworthy follow mechanic game would be Puerto Rico. I think that it might. I I tried to look into it, but I think it might be the the pioneer for the follow mechanic. I'm not sure if I'm correct about that.
I think that I don't know if it was the pioneer, but it's definitely one of the biggest ones,
I
one of
think
the most
yeah, I think it's
noteworthy.
definitely one that that
Yeah.
that at least made the mechanic popular. So in
Mhm.
Puerto Rico, you are well, actually you clued me into the actual theme, but they've rethemed it since then.
Yep.
Uh, I guess um what would you call it? Colonizing?
Yeah, there's a really
Um,
good video that does the tutorial for Puerto Rico
okay.
by Knights of the Round Table, I think is the name of the YouTube channel, where it just says that like at the very beginning, like you're picking up these brown tokens.
Yeah.
These brown tokens are called
Yes.
colonists. They're
Yes,
not
yes.
colonists.
Okay.
Not colonists.
Yeah. We won't get too much into the politics, I
Yeah,
guess, but
yeah.
more or less, you're colonizing colonizing land. You're
Mhm.
creating your settlements and picking buildings, and it has and you know what I realize I mostly am familiar with the two-player variant where you have seven role selections or action selections, and I think that changes depending on the player count. But anyways, you take turns in a round. You take turns picking an action, and the person who picks the action gets again a more powerful version, um, or a bonus, and then everyone can follow that. And then until that round is complete, that action cannot be selected again. And that's kind of the gimmick of Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
So and again, I picked that. It was um I think it was one of the earliest, at least games, especially that got popular. I still think it still has a good following. I think that's one of those evergreen type games.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Puerto Rico was my biggest game choice.
Your number one most
Hmm.
noteworthy, biggest. Nice. I anticipated this, Bry, because I was
Yeah,
like, we're definitely
exactly.
gonna say Puerto Rico.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
I'm
that's why I
trying
do
to
have
determine.
okay, I do have another one, but I'm gonna let you go first and then
Oh,
I'll
okay.
give my honorable mention.
Oh, okay, okay. So my number one most noteworthy biggest is
Okay.
actually I'm gonna say Tiny Towns. Have you ever played Tiny
Oh, okay.
Towns?
Yeah, I have played Tiny Town. I played it
Okay.
on BGA.
Oh, I didn't even know they had Tiny Towns on BJ.
Or I think I did.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to go back and
Anyways.
play that. Anyway, I like it because it was a big hit with my gaming group.
Hmm.
I did not really think about this game as having a follow mechanic, but if you're talking about having like a mandatory follow action, then that's what Tiny
Okay.
Towns is. Because if you've never played it before, Tiny Towns is it's a setup grid, and then there's different colored cubes, and then like when it's your turn, you announce like a colored cube, and they're like represent
Right.
wood or clay or stone, and then everyone takes one color, one cube of that color, and then you get to place it anywhere on your board. And then if you can make an outline of a building, you make that building, and those
Oh.
different buildings score you points and stuff. But I always call it the bingo mechanic, basically,
Okay.
because
Right.
like you announce something, everyone's got to follow that, and then like you may bingo being able to make a building or something.
Maybe I'm getting the game confused with a different one because
Oh,
now this isn't sounding familiar to me. So
oh, okay. So you have not played Tiny Towns
no.
before. Okay. Well, why I think it's most noteworthy is that it appeals to a pretty large audience. Like it has those anthropomorphized like animals again, who are the characters.
Right.
Plays a large crowd, up 1 to 6 players. It actually has grid coverage in it. So if you've listened to
Okay.
other AP Table Talk podcasts before, we covered grid coverage. It's one of our earlier episodes. I like it because it's fun, it's easy, engaging. Part of the reason I think that the follow mechanic is really important for engagement is that there's no downtime basically, because like when someone announces like the color brick or cube, everyone's got to take it and you got to put it on
Hmm.
your board somewhere. But the only bad part is that where you can use the follow mechanic strategically here is if you ever get to a point where your board is completely filled with cubes and you cannot make a building, then you're just eliminated from the game. So there's
Ah,
player elimination in tiny towns, but
interesting. Okay,
I
that's
like the
high
mechanic of it.
stakes.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of high stakes, but like
I
I don't know,
mean,
I've never
how
played.
long is the game? About.
Oh, I mean, like I think it really depends on player count. Like if you do
Okay.
full six, it's gonna be at least an hour, I feel.
Yeah,
It could
see,
be less.
I don't mind player elimination, but I prefer it in a shorter game.
Yeah.
Like
No.
player elimination, like in Coup, for example, where it's like, what at most 15 minutes that would be like a long game of Coup.
Yeah, yeah.
Player elimination is not a big deal.
Well, for this, I think you'd like it, Brian, because you have a lot of agency in where you place the cube. So
Hmm.
there's, what patterns make a building. So you're like, if I
Right.
place this here, this is the only building I can make. So
Got you. So
I
you're
gotta be
already
strategic
committed.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it sounds interesting actually. I'll have to look into that one.
yeah,
I
it's a good
wrote it
one.
down
Yeah.
on my yeah, I think at the beginning since we began recording this podcast, my want to play list has just grown and grown and grown.
Balloon, right?
Yeah.
You had an
Okay.
honorable mention, Brian,
So
for
I
most
did
noteworthy.
again, I did anticipate that we would have that Puerto Rico was going to show up here. So my honorable mention, which I actually haven't played, but I put it in as my honorable mention because it's big enough that I know about it and it's talked about a lot, even though my understanding is it's really hard to get a copy because it's generally out of print. And that is Glory to Rome. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it, and someone in our group has it, and I didn't know it was
Ah,
out of print. So now I got to play it.
I think they don't do big print runs because I think it's one where like people really pay on the secondary market to get a
Oh, I
copy.
see.
So
Nice.
maybe I'll let you talk about it then because
Okay.
you're probably more familiar with it than I am.
Well, I've never played. That's the thing. Some guy in our
Oh,
group
okay.
has it, but
So
I haven't played it yet.
yeah, again, I mean, it's similar. I think you're choosing roles
Mhm.
that each person can follow. It does use one of our favorite mechanics, the multi-use cards.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think you're actually playing from a deck, different roles, and that's how you can choose your roles. And the cards themselves tuck into different sides of the board
Mhm.
to become structures in how you get the bonuses on the rolls. So you can make your I don't remember the names of the actions, but let's say there's a build action. As you use that action and you build onto a certain part of your board,
Mhm.
it makes that action stronger for you.
Mhm.
So it's a little different in that your bonuses become asymmetrical, I
Oh,
guess.
I see.
You can decide which actions become more powerful for you.
Mhm.
And that's my understanding, having never played the game and just kind of hearing about it a bunch. And
Okay.
that's kind of why I put it here, just because I've heard about it so many times. It
Mhm.
comes up a lot in when I watch videos and stuff like that, and just
Mhm.
talking to other people. And I think that was a big fan favorite, but
Mhm.
I can't say that it's bigger than Puerto Rico because if it was, it wouldn't be out of print all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless that's their business model, being out of
Right.
print,
Right.
getting on the secondary
So
market.
that was yeah, that was my honorable mention biggest game.
Okay. Shall we go on to number two now?
Sure. The first
Mhm.
game they played, do you want me to continue or did you want to go on this one? I
Well, how
just went.
about since you just went with your honorable mention, I'll start
Sure.
off on
Go
number
ahead.
two. So for number two, we're talking about our first follow game. And this is why I put it here. I put Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico was the very first game with a follow mechanic we ever played. And instead of like rehashing what Puerto Rico is, because Brian, you talked about it before,
Right.
instead, what I did was I went through my old journal and I read the article, my entry from when we played Puerto Rico.
Ah,
It was
okay.
PAX East
Yes, I was
Boston.
gonna say I remember when we played. I was gonna ask, is that the first time you played it?
It is, it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
I
was,
and I dreaded that game.
you
Do you know
did.
why?
I do know why, and I'm going to go through my bullet points
Yeah,
right here.
go ahead.
So we played at PAX East in
Yes.
Boston, April 2014, so
Hmm.
over 10 years ago now. It didn't make sense to me at the time because Puerto Rico is a game that you had played a lot with Violet,
Hmm.
but this was the original print, and I think that you were playing with the two-player variant, which I was not familiar
Right.
with. And then we were going to sit down and play it, and then like two other dudes were just walking around and like, "Hey, are you going to play Puerto Rico? Can we play?" And then
Yep.
you, with your Canadian sensibilities, you were like, "I'm never going to say no," but you also hated when other people come down and
Yeah.
play with us. So I remember you being super
This was one of
annoyed.
my I think it was either my first or second PAX.
PAX. I think it was your first PAX actually,
It might have been my
2014.
first, and I that was one of the things. It's like okay, so for the audience who doesn't know me, I am a social antisocial person.
You're like, let's play
I
these board games together, but
I really
without
need
other
to be
people.
shoehorned into, yeah, I do things that should be done with as a social activity by myself. I played WoW
Mhm.
solo for years.
So
And
that was
sorry,
mine.
go on, not to interrupt you,
No, that
but
was my Puerto Rico memory. Like
okay,
we sat down, you're
yes.
like, oh, we're gonna play Puerto Rico. This is a game that me and Violet have played a bunch of times. I was like, okay, I'm game. I have no idea what's going on. And you explained me the rules, and like I'm just getting in the board games for the first time. I'm like, all right, like you pick something, then we all get to do it apparently, and then I get to do it, but then that action has become available. I'm still not following you, but I'm gonna try to play as best I can. And then those two other guys sat down, or they wanted to play, and I was like, I don't know, like
Yeah,
Brian, you're teaching me this game. You make the decision. And you're like, well,
yeah,
I'm not going to say no because that'll
yeah.
be, that would cause conflict. So I'm just going to say yes, but grit my
I
teeth the
just
entire
I
time.
didn't have enough PAX experience under my belt, so I felt like I couldn't say no. The whole spirit of the area, and again, it was fine, and part of it being fine was that I won that game, so it
Yeah.
was okay.
Handily too, from what I remember. That was my
Um,
first. What about you, Brian?
so yes, in researching and
Hmm.
trying to remember what my first was, I knew Puerto Rico was a contender. I think it was my first as well. So I went ahead and picked a different one as my first because I knew I was going to talk about Puerto Rico already. But I do think Puerto Rico was my first. The next closest, I believe, was Tiny Epic Kingdoms.
Oh, Yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
I'm pretty sure I played Puerto Rico first,
Mhm.
but Tiny Epic Kingdoms was early. And actually, I was trying to remember if I played Tiny Epic Galaxies before I played Tiny Epic Kingdoms, but I think I
Mhm.
played Kingdoms first. Both of which are follow games. So I would say Tiny Epic Kingdoms, though, is an example of one where you do use the follow mechanic. However, I believe everyone just gets the same action. I don't think there's anything special about the action
Mhm.
if you're the one who chooses it, if I'm remembering
Um,
correctly. It's been a while since I played it, but
I don't. I mean, like I did spend some time writing some notes about both of those games, but
Mhm.
like Tiny Epic Kingdoms, I am blanking on because
I'm pretty
we
sure
played it
that
so
you
long ago. Yeah.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that you just get the same action. The advantage is that you're forcing the opponent to use it at an inopportune time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Now you don't have to use it. I think you can collect resources if you don't want to use the action.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but if I remember correctly, which I'm 99% sure that you just get this like everyone gets the same action.
Hmm.
And then Tiny Epic Galaxies, which was early there for me as well. Those are both of the ones that got me into the Tiny Epic, the Scott Alms
Yeah.
games.
Yep.
Um, that one is was kind of a was kind of a held up as a role for the Galaxy Light, right?
Uh,
What people kind of
well, I don't
called it
know
that.
because I know at the time I never played Roll for the Galaxy. I only
Right.
played Tiny
I
Epic
just mean I
Galaxies.
think as far as explaining it
Oh, well, you
quickly
mean like
right
just a
now,
general
I think
overview
that
of the
that's
game?
yeah. I played Roll for the Galaxy a couple years later, I think.
Hmm.
But I think Tiny Epic Galaxies is still my favorite of the Tiny Epic games.
Hmm.
Although I will say I have a backlog of them now, so I haven't played some of the newer ones.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me too. I'm big backlog. Not a
Mhm.
Tiny Epic backlog, a big backlog
Oh, well, I mean,
of
yes,
Tiny
I
Epic
have a big
games.
backlog, but a few of those are Tiny Epic games. Okay, so that covers our first games played,
Yep.
first follow games played. So we'll move on to our favorite
Hmm.
follow mechanic games. Would you like to go first, or
Um,
you
yeah,
want me to
I guess we'll
keep
follow
going?
that format because we're
Sure.
trading off. Number three, my favorite, and you had brought this up
Mhm.
before, Brian. It's going to be Tiny Epic Galaxies for me.
Yeah.
It was the very first, well, not the very first. It was not the very first Tiny Epic game I played. I think that was Tiny Epic Kingdoms that you showed me.
Hmm.
But then afterwards, Tiny Epic Galaxies, and I think is like I haven't played all of the Tiny Epic games, but I think is the best
Right.
out of all of them. And I really like this because again, I was like looking for games in a small box. I felt that like big box games were kind of daunting.
Mhm.
And I really like the follow mechanic because of it provided you something to do with your downtime. And I think that's like
Yes.
where the follow mechanic really shines because it's, like otherwise when other people take their turn, you could go do whatever. You don't even really have to pay attention, even though you should in between turns.
Yeah, like it
Um,
really keeps you invested
yeah,
in
exactly.
what's going on.
But what I got introduced to the follow mechanic with Tiny Epic Galaxies is that it's strategic in that other games we've talked about so far, you must follow.
Hmm.
Whereas with Tiny Epic Galaxies, you may follow, and you can only follow if you have culture, which is a resource to spend that allows you to
Right.
like duplicate someone's action. So I would go with Tiny Epic Galaxies as both my favorite Tiny Epic game I've played and also my favorite follow mechanic game.
Okay. Yeah, it is. It was definitely on my short list,
Hmm.
but I actually think for our follow mechanic episode, it would have been a clean sweep Puerto Rico for me because I think that Puerto Rico just has such staying power for me. Like I still could play that and really enjoy that game.
Hmm.
It might be my favorite, but I will put an asterisk there. In preparation for this episode, we played a game that I think I liked better than you called New Frontiers.
Mm,
And I don't think I'm the first to say it, but it's basically Puerto Rico in space.
I
And
guess, yeah.
I like that it has more variation. So in Puerto Rico, your upgrades are set. Like there are the same buildings that you can build every game. Whereas there is some randomization in New Frontiers that I think would add some, just kind of switch up the game a little bit,
Mm,
which I liked. I would keep it as an asterisk because I haven't played it enough to really say that it kind of beats out Puerto Rico for me, but it's definitely even for our couple games that we played, it's a strong contender for me.
Mhm.
And because I was trying to just not have Puerto Rico be the only thing we talked about, I did pick another one that is also very close, but doesn't get to the table a lot, and that is Rising Sun.
Yep. Yep.
Have you played Rising Sun?
Yeah, I have, but not as many. Well, one, it's a long game, and it
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't get
And
to the table
and
often.
you
But I
kind of
played at
need
least
to have a
twice.
good group.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is one where I definitely really enjoy the game, but it's hard for me to get it to the table.
Mm.
So it's hard for me to say it's my favorite because I think I've played it 3 times total,
Hmm.
maybe four. But
It's tough.
Rising
I
Sun
mean,
is another one that,
it's an awesome looking game, but it's tough to get to the table.
yeah, yeah, and it does do some different things with the follow mechanic as well. But I think I have that elsewhere in my notes here, so we can talk about that later in the episode.
Right, right.
Okay, so I think that concludes our example section.
Yeah, so we're going to
Um,
go into Beyond the Basics now.
yeah.
So, like before, we're going to both roll our d20s, and whoever
Okay.
rolls higher is going to lead.
Okay. Ready? Three,
All right,
two,
two,
one.
one.
I got two.
All right, now I got 11.
Okay.
All right, so I'm leading us off. All right. So in this section, we're going to go through each individual different aspects of the mechanic, and we're going to start out with the first one, which is integration with theme. So we're specifically looking at the questions like, is this flexible enough to fit into different themes? And can it help to create a cohesive and immersive experience? So at least my input here, and I was talking to Brian about this prior to us
Hmm.
recording, was that I thought I liked this mechanic more than I did, and part of the reason I thought I liked it more was because I just like the fact that it addresses a lot of that downtime. But when I was looking at this with theme, it seems like there is a few themes that tend to be like represented with games that have the follow mechanic. So I can't say that the follow mechanic alone is big on theme, but overall the follow mechanic is pretty versatile and can be used generically. But I went through the list, Bry, and I had these as
Right.
like three major themes. So space games that have the follow mechanic, Eminent Domain,
Yeah.
New Frontiers that you said
Yep.
before Roll for the Galaxy,
Right.
Race for the Galaxy,
Yep.
Terraforming Mars, which has a follow mechanic. Oh, Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. That's what
Oh,
we
okay. I was gonna
tagged it
say.
as. And then Twilight Imperium 4th edition is follow mechanic.
Okay.
Three historical games, Glass Road, Carnegie, and Glory to Rome. And then
Okay.
fantasy
I
ones,
mean, I would put Puerto Rico into
historical.
historical as well.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh, so historical, Glass Road, Carnegie, Glory to Rome.
Yeah.
And then fantasy, Merchants of the Dark Road, Villages of Valeria, and Tiny Epic Kingdom. So
Okay.
I feel like you could pretty much use the follow mechanic with any theme. I don't think it's really
Right.
tied to it. So it's generic for me at best, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I actually don't think that the follow mechanic itself fits you can use it with the theme, but I don't see it adding to the theme on its own.
Hmm. Hmm.
The closest that I could come up with was in Rising Sun, actually, what we were just talking about.
Hmm.
So the way Rising Sun works, it's the same idea. You you draw 3 tiles on your turn, which each have different actions, and you have to pick one from those tiles on
Hmm.
your turn. And in a big part of Rising Sun is you can ally with one other player in the middle of each round, or sorry, at certain tea ceremony times in the game. And if you are an ally of the player choosing, you both can take the more powerful version of the action,
Hmm.
whereas everyone else takes the more basic version of the action.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
it kind of depends on the action. Some of them
Yeah.
don't have it. Like, I mean, one of the actions is betray your ally, so the uh the ally doesn't get anything then. But
Yeah.
um that one was the only one that kind of made a little bit of sense as why you would have to follow or why you would get any benefits based on the action of another player
Hmm.
from a theme standpoint.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. It's very generic. I mean, I just don't think it actually adds to the theme at all. I
Yeah.
enjoy it from a mechanic standpoint and from a
Mhm.
gameplay standpoint, but I don't actually think it adds to the theme.
Okay. I'm glad I wasn't the only one
Yeah.
that thought this. All right. So that was integration with theme.
Hmm.
Um, You want to lead off the next one,
Start,
Bryce?
sure.
Depth and
So
strategic
yeah,
options.
so depth and strategic options.
Mhm.
So in this one, I think that generally, I think that I do enjoy the follow mechanic for what it adds from a strategy and tactical standpoint. I enjoy uh, that kind of you're anticipating the choices of the other players and kind of adapting your strategy to what you think they're going to play, because generally there are a set number of known actions.
Mhm.
I mean, that's kind of how it works. So you can kind of look at their game state and say, okay, well, they're probably going for this, so they're going to pick one of these actions, which is going to leave me with this, and trying to create your combo or your chain of actions based on anticipating them. And I think I like that you have to kind of be agile too, because if they don't do what you anticipated, you're going to have an alternate strategy. And you
Mhm.
also, your strategy is kind of also going to depend on, well, they probably think I'm going to do this, but I can throw them, you see them preparing for you to do something. So you kind of go a different way.
Mhm. I think that when you think about like what you see other players preparing for, I feel like you're like examining the game as like a two player scenario. It doesn't always have
Mhm.
to be that. I
Right.
realize, like for the follow action.
Mhm.
But oh, did you have something else to go, Brian? To
It's
do
okay. Go
with
ahead. And
oh, okay.
we can go back and forth a little bit.
Because one of the things I was thinking about was that and we brought it up before, is like, is it a mandatory follow or an optional follow?
Mhm.
And if it's an optional follow, then do you have to spend some sort of resource in order to make it happen, like with
Right.
Tiny Epic Galaxies? So like the strategic part of it, I think, is not only determining if you have to follow or if you should or must you follow or if you should follow, and then if you follow, if you have the resources to spend it,
Mhm.
is again like looking at the game state, looking at what other players have in like their resources, and then trying to like
Right.
mitigate it, or at least like take the action that is most beneficial for you or least beneficial for the other player.
Right.
And I see the examples as in like Tiny Epic Galaxies, like I said,
Mhm.
spend a culture in order to follow. The other one though, and we played this on VGA, and I was like, this is not making sense to me. But then I had a physical copy of Glass Road. So
Okay.
I learned how to play Glass Road in
Okay.
person, and I think that one has the best combination of must and well, no, it has a must follow in it. But in Glass Road, for those of you who've never played Glass Road before, you're playing as like glass makers in like the Bavarian woods in the 17th century, and you all select like a hand of cards, and then one player is the first player will like play their card, and you if you have that same card in your hand, which is like an action, then you
You're
have
kind
to
of
follow it.
your actions. You're picking out, what is it, like three actions for that round each out of a set number of like 10 actions or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
exactly.
if any of your actions match
Hmm.
one that the other player played, you both kind of get like part of the action,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So
Go ahead.
um it's like you're probably going to do three actions, but like you have a hand of five cards.
Hmm.
So I was talking about this with my group afterwards, whereas if you choose an action that no one else has, you
Yep.
get like a super action because you get to do two things on the card.
Right.
But if you choose an action that someone else has, you get to do like half of that action on the card, but at
Right.
least you still get to do an action. Otherwise, if you chose
Yeah.
like three cards that no one else chose, you only get three super actions that round. Whereas if you had like some follow actions, you could get like one super action and or like a few super
Right. Right.
actions and a
Right.
few half actions. So like if you're thinking about it from an action economy, which I know we talked about a lot, like
Hmm.
sometimes it may be good to follow, sometimes it's not good to follow if you need to take like a
Yeah.
really big action. So that I think is the most strategic part about follow for me,
Okay.
but it's really based on specific games.
Right.
Yeah.
Just going back to what you're saying about that you have that option to choose to follow or not,
Mhm.
or if you do follow and then not having the resources if you have to follow, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And one other aspect of that that doesn't isn't actually specific to the action you're choosing though,
Hmm.
is kind of that risk reward again of choosing a suboptimal action for yourself, because it will benefit you the most by hurting your opponents. And
Hmm.
it doesn't even have to be the action, but just the fact that if they don't have a way to perform that action properly, not only can they not perform it optimally for themselves,
Hmm.
but generally when you in the like I'm thinking of games like Puerto Rico or Tiny Epic Kingdoms
Mhm.
where you those actions can only be chosen once in a round. So now that action is gone for
Yeah.
them for that entire round.
Mhm.
So if we're thinking of a game like Puerto Rico, there is an action to ship your goods.
Mhm.
So if you know that the other player is going to get some goods, but they don't have anything right now, and you may only have like, oh, I only have one corn to ship, which isn't
Mhm.
going to get you a lot of points, but it gets you something.
Mhm.
So I'm going to pick the ship action. You
Yeah.
get the bonus because you chose the action. You get to ship your one corn.
Mhm.
The other player doesn't get to ship anything. And then also, they won't be able to ship anything until the round cycles. And who
Right. Right.
knows what the situation is going to be at that point.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of it more in that sense of the action itself as a commodity almost.
That's an interesting way to think about it
Hmm.
because it's like that is a true, like if you believe in min-max strategy or max-min strategy,
Right.
you have a very small like advantage, but the additional like I don't know if you call it subjective advantage is the fact that you prevent your opponent from doing something would be
Right.
a huge advantage for them.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe I look at it that way a lot because I do generally play a lot of two player and it's
Yeah.
easier to weigh it out like that in a two player. Like you can still do it with more, but obviously the more players, the harder it is to then weigh that action for all the other players.
Mhm.
And then it becomes less aggressive. So I don't like it as much.
No, it has to be as aggressive as
Yeah,
possible.
I have to. Yeah, I would much rather hurt the other person more than get points myself.
I have to win at all costs. All right. So that was
Okay. That was
depth
our
and
depth and
strategic
yeah,
options.
right. So we'll move on to balance and fairness,
Yeah.
and you can go ahead and lead us off on this one.
All right, so for balance and fairness, we're really looking at if this mechanic gives all players a fair chance to succeed, and is it more based on strategy or luck? Is there any opportunities for players to catch up and for other additional player interaction? And if it's an unbalanced mechanic, it can lead to frustrating experiences and discourage players. So I can say, like, I think that overall, the follow mechanic really embodies the fact that you can keep players engaged if it's a turn-based game when it's not their turn, because they either
Hmm.
have to follow or they can choose to follow.
Right.
So it could go either way on fairness, and it's going to be really, I think, based on the actual game, must
Hmm.
follow versus optional. It gives the players a lot of agency to do their part in the choice architecture and decision framework because it allows them, like you said, Brian, to choose a specific action that'll be like a minimal benefit for them, but a
Hmm.
maximal like loss for someone else. And I think you can really play with those different game states in those different games that you're playing.
Right.
So from like a game theory perspective, I think that follow mechanic, especially if it's a must follow, is very it can be very strategic. I don't know if it's going to be balanced because I think that's subjected to the game, and if it's
Yeah.
fair, I think is going to be really based on play testing. And I think that the two games I cite here is going back to Tiny Towns. I think it's really great
Okay.
for providing good, player agency and like choice architecture without bogging down the players. But there's a game, Brian, I'm going to cite that I definitely know you did not cite because you've never played it before because it's a game I've designed called
Ah, okay.
Estate Sale that has the follow
Okay.
mechanic. Because I was going through it and I was like, oh, wait a second. That game I designed that Brian's never played, it's got follow mechanic. And I won't go through the entire game, but
Sure.
the overall premise is that I was inspired by this by going to an estate sale. And if you've never
Okay.
been to one, it's basically a garage sale for someone that has like passed away and they're basically just trying to sell, they're liquidating everything in the house.
Right.
So in a estate sale, you are playing like a family member that's trying to compete against other families to buy a bunch of stuff in this estate sale so that you earn the most number of points or money to win. But the game only has four actions. I think it's been a while since I got on the table. It's like buy, auction, dumpster, and move.
Okay.
And when you choose an action, like when you choose an action, you do that action, you take a main action. Everyone else has the option to do a follow action that's less powerful, but all the other actions you didn't choose get a random commodity token from the bag.
Right.
So that I designed it that way because I wanted it to be, I felt it was self-balancing in that you can't always afford to choose the same action because the benefits from choosing other actions that haven't been chosen in a while are like growing. So
Right.
those are
Right.
the two
Right.
games I said.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought of this more in the sense of I just looked at how I think that, yeah, I agree. The balance definitely depends on the implementation. So
Hmm.
I just looked at a few games and saw how they tried to deal with balance. So if we go back to, I'm going to start with Puerto Rico
Hmm.
because it kind of is similar to what you're talking about, where the actions that are not selected in Puerto Rico and around, they get a coin on them
Yep.
to incentivize them to be chosen if they haven't been chosen for a long time.
Mhm.
And I think it's set up in such a way that the number of actions is there so that the start player rotates.
Hmm.
Because I do feel that there is in a follow game, especially when there is you get a more powerful version of the action, there is an advantage to the player who picks first that for that round. So I think that Puerto Rico does the rotating player, the New Frontiers or Puerto Rico in Space that we played. They have an interesting system where you actually there's an action that moves your turn up in the turn order.
Oh, that's what
I
that is.
yeah, I think we never used it in our game, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it matter. It's probably less impactful in the two-player game,
Mhm.
but I bet it probably has more value in higher player counts. So they handled it that way where you have to use an action to move yourself up in the player order.
Mhm.
And the one game that I can think where there's been debate on the balance of it is back to Rising Sun again. In that game, there is a very limited number of action selections in the entire game.
Mhm.
So when you have a high player count and there's very few action selections, I think that brings up this issue of is it balanced? Because when the actions are so important and there's so few to choose from,
Mhm.
I think what people argue in that is that if you are first player in certain player counts, you have more turns than the other players. And because the turns are so important,
Yeah.
they say that there's an advantage. Now, the player order is set in that based on the clans that you choose. Like it's not random. So I don't know if that's been balanced in I can't say enough that I played it enough
Yeah.
that it definitely came up as someone questioned it in the game that we played.
Mhm.
But my counter to that is that if you think that a player is going to have more turns and an advantage, then try to ally with that player because you get the bonus of the action that that player chose
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're their ally. So I think because that game relies on negotiation, I
Mhm.
think you could mitigate it. But I couldn't say for sure because I don't think in my lifetime I will get it to the table enough that I could be an expert on balance for that game.
I feel like
But
that
that's
needs to
definitely,
be,
sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
that needs to be stated as like a caveat in the rule book, like an asterisk and like a call out box. And it's like,
Mhm.
listen, the guy that's going to, or the player that's going to choose the action, they're going to get a lot more, they're potentially going to get a lot more action. So it would
Maybe
be
you want to
your
be an ally
benefit
with
to
them.
ally with.
I think they have like a little like general strategy section in the
Okay.
book, but I generally try to not read those until I play the game a few times.
Yeah. I feel
Um,
like that's kind of a critical thing to know though, especially if
right,
like the
right.
allyship is going to radically
Yeah.
swing the game in a player's
And
favor.
again, it might not need it maybe because
Yeah.
they know which player is going to be first based on the clan.
Hmm.
Maybe that's balanced in the clan powers. I'm not sure because the clans are asymmetric. They have asymmetric powers in that game.
Hmm.
So maybe it's balanced in that sense. I don't know, but I know that that is a an internet argument for Rising Sun.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
so
Balance and fairness.
yeah, so that was our balance fairness. We'll move on to player engagement and fun.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is this my turn to lead off?
Yeah, you lead
Yeah,
off on
okay.
this one.
So I think we spoke about this a number of times, but as far as the player engagement, I think this is depending on how you want to look at it, very, very beneficial to player engagement. I think it keeps you involved because it's important that you know what is being chosen on other players' turns. Plus, you will possibly be playing on other people's turns if you're following their action. So I definitely think it's a positive for player engagement. Fun, again, I think comes down to the the specific game itself. I generally like the follow mechanic. I can't think of too many games where I think that it detracts from the fun of the game. But I also generally like high player interaction games.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Nice. So for me, I brought this up before with Glass Road because I was interested in playing it. We played on BGA. It didn't really sink in with me. I had to play it in person to really get the appreciation for it.
mhm,
But I think the most interesting and fun moment for me, like we said before, we were discussing like Glass Road is about those action selection with the
right.
cards, and it was a lot of like, all right, I'm going to choose these five cards because three of these cards I don't think anyone else is going to play. So those are going to be my big actions. But these other two, like these other players, I think are ripe for using it. So I'm going to try to use that.
Hmm.
But you also have to determine what order you're going to play them in because sometimes if a player plays it and you don't have that card in your hand, you may not follow. So it was an interesting decision space, and I also think what made it fun for me because I'm like, okay, this is like if everything goes my way, I would play these five cards in this specific order in order to do this to win the game. And I think
Right.
that was one of the most fun moments. I'm going back to my earlier statement about I think the big decision if you're the designer here is are you going to have a mandatory follow or it's going to be an optional follow? And if it's an
Mhm.
optional follow, do you have to like spend any resources to do so? A game I'm going to cite here, and I know, Bri, you talked about New Frontiers, which
Yes.
was the first or one of the space follow games we played on BGA.
Yes.
The other one that I actually liked better was Eminent
Eminent
Domain
domain. Yeah. That
because
was
it had
interesting to me.
like, yeah, it had like, it's a combination of like deck building and with the follow action, which we covered deck building in our last episode. So I think that Eminent Domain seems to be the most flexible game we played so far where this has been the case. And the game still hasn't sunk in with me because I think we played twice and I lost twice. But basically when you are the first player, you choose an action to lead and then you do that action. And then you choose a secondary action, and then you can boost that secondary action with cards from your hand, and then other players have the option to follow you, also using cards in their hand. Did I summarize that correctly, Brian?
Yeah, they call the secondary one. First you choose an action, then you choose a role, and you can
Oh, that's right.
boost the role
Yeah.
with your cards.
Yeah. And I thought
But
that was really cool because depending on my hand, I'm like, okay, I definitely need to like survey, but I can do a really big attack because I have all these other attack cards in my hand. Like I could boost it with all these other attack cards. And I thought that was a cool decision structure, at least for me.
yeah, that one definitely has promise to me. I feel like it was a disservice for me to play it the way we generally play turn-based.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like I want to play that one in real time.
Yeah.
I think the pacing will be better, and just because it has that deck builder portion, I feel like I need to be playing it in real time and to
Mhm.
kind of pay attention to everything that's going on. But I still enjoyed it,
Yeah.
and it was definitely interesting to me too. And I that one had been recommended to me before a
Oh,
few
really?
times for a
Yeah.
while because I think it's an older game.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
think so.
so it's definitely been around. But yeah, I enjoyed that one.
Oh, yeah. It's from 2011.
Yeah, yeah,
Considered
that's
ancient, I
definitely
would say.
yeah, in the board game space for sure.
Yeah, I know. How about you, Brian?
Um,
Player engagement and fun.
yeah, I started us off on that one. So
Oh, you
we'll
did.
move. Yeah. So we'll move to variety and replayability.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, you can start us on this one.
Okay. So for this one, we're looking if it has enough depth and variability to keep players coming back for more. And then trying to determine if the mechanic scales with different player counts. So for me, I think that the follow mechanic can offer some really great depth and variety. I talked about a little bit about that with Glass Road. So that is something that I think can make the game like very replayable. I think that I would like to see if there could be tied to a smaller like subset of actions.
Right.
And I think that the way it works right now is just with a wide set of like basic actions. And I think there are going to be some exceptions, but for the most part, the games we played are like pretty wide, like standard actions. But I think that the heaviest follow game that we played is on BJ and it's Carnegie. And that game just finished, and like I had a tough time learning that game. I couldn't find any good videos that really jive with me. And I ended up reading the PDF rule book, but over like the course of several days, like I just read like a section, put it down, read another section. That did not help with my comprehension. Then I just launched into the game on BGA and I'm like, okay, I generally feel like I know what's happening here, but we'll play and see what goes on. And I haven't picked it up since, but like I would think that, and Bri, Let me know what you think. I think that was the heaviest follow game we
That
tested
I think that's
leading
definitely the
up to this.
heaviest one we
Yeah.
played.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I
Hmm.
feel like I was having trouble learning it by watching.
Hmm.
And then I think you had started the invite off, and
Yep.
so it got to the point where I'm just like, you know what? I think I know enough to get started.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start playing the game.
Hmm.
But because I didn't really fully understand, I was playing, but I didn't look at like how you score points or anything like that. So I knew the actions to do. I knew how the mechanics of playing the game, but there was a lot of moving parts in that game,
Yeah.
and I didn't really fully understand how they interacted. Again, I think it suffered at least from a learning standpoint of playing like by mail, how we play like
Hmm.
playing turn based like that. I when it's heavier like that, I feel like I need to be sitting there and watching everything happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when the other player's playing too. I agree. I agree. Yeah, that was definitely the heaviest one.
Yeah.
But I do think the space, yeah, the follow mechanic, because you can, it is a very open mechanic because it's not tied to a theme or anything like that, as we said,
Hmm.
where it may be a detriment in that sense. I think that leaves it open to giving it a lot of chance for variety because you can kind of fit it with anything. You can fit it with any actions, and just the sense of changing that action order that it happens in is really going to give you a lot of variety and replayability in the game. If we
Hmm.
look at again one of the older, possibly oldest, is Puerto Rico, which
Yeah.
has a set actions. It has set buildings. There is a little bit of randomization, but the game's like I've been playing that one a lot. I think there is one small expansion that I don't own,
Hmm.
but we never got tired of it because the outcome is different just because you're going to pick those actions at a slightly different order.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that alone gives you a lot of variety and replayability.
Nice. Cool. Should we go on to the next one, Brian?
Okay, innovation and originality.
Yeah.
Does it offer something new and interesting?
Hmm.
Yes, I do think that it has shown a lot of innovation.
Hmm.
We just talked about Eminent Domain, which is
Hmm.
like a deck builder and a follow mechanic mixed together. I spoke about Rising Sun a bunch of times, which adds that ally mechanic into it.
Hmm.
We have different variants on how, I mean, you're mixing it in with different ways to choose actions as well. So there's the drafting, uh, whether it be drafting from an open pool or drafting from your cards or whatnot. So
Hmm.
I think there's plenty of ways that you can implement the follow mechanic or add it to other. I know you talk a lot about meshing one mechanic and finding another mechanic that it's never been mixed with,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
an interesting way to do that. And I think that the follow mechanic is one that is ripe to be meshed with many other things that may not have been tried yet or found a way to make it interesting yet.
Yeah. You're right. I do look for ways to mesh that mechanic with something new. But we talked about this before. I kind of disagree with you. I don't think that the follow mechanic offers a lot of like innovation and like I guess just new offerings. Like for me, I you talked about it with theme, which is that like I don't think the theme is really influenced by follow. Like you could pretty much throw the follow mechanic on any game, save for any games that I think have just like a long play time.
Mhm.
Because again, if you decide to include a follow mechanic and make it mandatory, that means like for a four-player game, each quote unquote turn has like
Right.
four actions to resolve as opposed to just one like the live player's action.
Right.
If you have a follow, then you do it, and then everyone else that's playing the game has to do it. So like if you're already playing a really or designing a really long game, I think having the follow mechanic would just make that long game even longer. But uh
Or I mean,
yeah,
it could speed it up because people are they're getting a lot more done in a round.
yeah,
Because instead of having one action per round, you have however many players' actions in a round, if depending on how that's set up, right? I mean, you would
yeah,
design it in such a way that says maybe when I say that it offers a lot of innovation, the thing is it's hard to separate the follow mechanic from action selection
yeah,
and action
yeah,
drafting
yeah,
because it kind of goes together because you're following, I mean, you're following actions. So in some way there has to be an action to follow.
Mhm.
So it's hard to separate that. And if I package that together and think of joining all of that together with other mechanics, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. I think that it didn't work for my estate sale game because the follow mechanic only makes it so that there's just more things to do. It doesn't
Right,
actually
right,
speed up the game. It just makes it so that you may be able to score more points.
right.
But like yeah, I think that it's, trying to think of like a cooking reference here. I feel like the follow
Well,
mechanic is just kind of like the salt for
right.
cooking. Like
Well, I
you could use
so
some, you could
so,
use a
so
lot. Yeah.
using what you just said,
Yeah.
and I haven't played your state game sale, but
Mm.
I assume your state game, does it just go by number of rounds?
No, it's triggered by like the depletion of a certain resource. At least that's how it's designed right now for depletion of a
Okay.
certain resource.
Because I think if the goal is like building like so in Puerto Rico, you're filling up your tableau with
Hmm.
buildings. And by having the follow, you're getting more done in a round.
Hmm.
So I actually think it pushes you towards endgame faster than if you
Yeah.
didn't have it.
Hmm.
And that's the way I say, like, you're getting more done in a round. Yes, the rounds take longer, but whether that balances out one way or the other, again, that comes down to the design, in my opinion.
Right, right. Well, when you play this game, Bri, you can give
Yeah,
me
I can
the
let
feedback
you
on
know.
this because right now it's way too long. That's always one of the
Gotcha.
pieces of feedback.
Right.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so that finishes off our Beyond the Basics,
Mm-hmm.
and we move on to the bonus round. So we were discussing before we started recording the episode
Mm-hmm.
that I was kind of scrounging together kind of to fill in my topics and stuff. So I don't have a lot for the bonus round. Um, so I can, if you've got anything, you can lead us off here.
Sure. I wrote down some key points.
Mhm.
One of them was I was talking to my group about this episode recording. I told them we're researching the follow mechanic for this one episode. And then one player in the group immediately said, "Oh, you mean like following suit, like in trick taking?" And I'm like, No, no." But then I was thinking about it some more and I'm like, is following suit and trick taking the same as a follow mechanic? And I said no, because I think the action is the trick, unless the trick is like connected or the card you play
I,
is connected to a
I think
specific action.
the action is playing the card,
Action is playing the card.
which is mandatory. Everybody
Yep.
has to do that. So
Yep.
you're not following. That's the
Hmm.
only action.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So I did not say it as eloquently
Yeah.
as that, but I was like, no, that's trick taking. We're
Yeah,
testing a
yeah.
different mechanic here.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a I mean, I can't come up with a better descriptor for the follow mechanic, but
Other
I
than
can
just follow.
understand how that would be confusing.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, my group has also been playing a lot of trick taking games, so
Right.
that's why I guess they had our disambiguation.
Right.
But the other points I had was that talked about tiny towns before with the bingo aspect.
Right.
Like I call the mechanic in that game has the mass market appeal that way. For me, I'm really breaking down follow into two different types. It's going to be the mandatory follow, the optional follow, and then I think
Right.
your game is based on how you structure the follow mechanic. Um, I think overall, and Bri, you said this specifically like with Puerto Rico, I think the follow action can have an outsized impact on the game, really depending on the number of players. Like if it moves the game state faster to the end based on, like you being able to follow and moving the game along, then it could speed up an otherwise like slow game. And then think that like the overall like if I had to pick like one shining star of the follow mechanic, it's the fact that for turn-based games, it gives players whose turn it's not something to do. And I think that's one of the most valuable aspects for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
And that I think we talked about that in the player engagement section is I
Mhm.
think that's the thing I enjoy about it is that it helps with that eliminating that downtime in
Mhm.
between turns, especially if you have players that are, more prone to AP, you can kind of spend that time kind of strategizing a bit more because it's your turn is not empty or your time is not empty during another player's turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, did you have anything else for bonus round?
Nope, that's it. I said
Yeah,
my
I don't
piece.
really have anything there. So I guess that wraps up our follow episode of AP Table Talk. If you'd like to hear more content like this, please be sure to subscribe. You can also check out more of our content, projects, and other information about us at universityxp.com.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love it if you took some time to rate the show. We live to lift others with learning. So if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Until next time, game on.